Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Hello and welcome to MOTS Ado About Nothing. My name is Rich Perry and I'm joined here with Scott Lerlow.
How's it going?
Ian Manser.
Hello?
Stephen Hermosi.
Hey, I'm here as well.
Let's get those out of the way. Tonight we're going to be reviewing the short story The Jaunt by Stephen King, and it was first published in the Twilight Zone magazine in 1981 and then collected for his short story book in 1985.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, you have our funny log line?
Yes, Jaunt your ass to Mars.
Which will make sense. Hopefully.
And we'll explain why that is funny shortly.
And Ian, hit us up with a synopsis.
All right, so a family is preparing for the jaunt to Mars, as Scott just referenced. It's a teleportation to Mars, and the main character decides to quell the fears of his nervous family by telling them this huge exposition dump over how jaunting was developed, and all the perils that are faced with it. And it turns out that in the what a twist ending, it causes those same fears to be realized.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to say it.
Yep.
I believe that I'm gonna kick it off with the intro body conclusion here. So I'm gonna go slightly more into depth with what you just said, but
Sure.
not too much. So it's this family. They're about to go on this mysterious jaunt, as it's called, and it's kind of this teleportation thing that they can jump between portals.
Real quick,
pretty
it's not
much.
mysterious. Like the jaunt is a known thing, like people use. I think the father has done a number of jaunts. His family has not, and he's
Right.
nervous about it.
It's a.
Go on.
You're right. It's not mysterious in the fact that it's unknown, but it's mysterious in the fact that I don't think anybody really understands how it works.
Sure.
They kind of figured it out and figured out how to use it, and it's a teleportation. However, despite the fact that it seems like it's instantaneous, if you are awake, if your conscious mind is awake during it, it seems like it's a very long time to you, and this causes animals and humans to go insane.
Die or go insane,
Yeah,
or both.
go insane and die.
I actually think it's premature aging that they come out with white hair. They come out with
Right.
Well, I think that's like effect of it. Like,
Yeah.
we'll get into it, but
Well,
yeah.
the body's so shocked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It sort of explores that and probably themes, but that is an aspect of the
So-
jaunt ride, if you will.
There's the father Mark, his wife Mary Liz, his son Ricky, and his daughter Patricia are going through this thing. Mark begins to tell the story. Ricky asks for the story because he's been promised by his father that he's going to tell it, and he starts telling the story of what happened. It involves a scientist and kind of learning how this works, and he puts a bunch of rats through, and they all die because they've gone through some untold horror. And then he tells about the other people that have gone through Awake, and they have had horrible things to say about it.
Well, it's almost
they're
like
not fans. They would give this 0 stars on Yelp.
would not travel again.
Yeah, would not travel again.
No, that was like an apocryphal story because there was rumors of what happens to a person who's sent through
Right.
conscience.
He kind of leaves out the gorier details.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's sort of like
He doesn't tell his family the gorier
He's
details,
skimming
but
it
he
for his
says,
family, yeah.
this would be bad if you weren't asleep.
But us,
when
the
this
audience,
happened.
being inside of his head, know exactly what he's talking about.
So, as it turns out, his son Ricky is an asshole and decides to stay awake
he's a
during it.
psychopathic 12-year-old kid.
Yeah. I mean, he basically just has
Not psychopathic per se, but just he acts like 12-year-old kids would
he
act.
has an we'll say an unhealthy interest in what happens to people that this happens to, and they go through, and at the end of the story, Ricky has one line to say to his father, and after all of his talk about how it seems like just time stretches out when you're in there, and it seems like an eternity, and his son says to him, "It's longer than you thought, Dad," and then they call him off, and presumably he fucking dies, because everything that's gone through it awake has died.
Sure.
So that's kind of the story. I don't know if I left anything important out. I mean, I left some important things out for sure, but anything that's integral to the story, I think you kind of get what it's about.
Yeah.
By my thing there.
So very much like a good joke with I feel that the punchline to this was set up early, but the problem with Stephen King developed this like clever twist, but he needed to deliver a lot of information for people. Like it's in a way like set up narratively. Like we need to get this information and build up the tension through like Stephen King giving all these horrific events that happened prior in order for the final moment to actually hit home really well. Although I just don't think that the middle section, which felt like a heavy exposition done well, was
entirely necessary.
Yeah, I think it could have been. I don't know. Like could have been done better.
Well,
I think. I'm sorry to cut you off, Scott. I'll let you go in like 5 seconds, but I think that the middle part of this was my favorite part. Honestly, I thought the beginning was a little bit slow, and I wasn't sure I was going to like it in the beginning. Then it kind of got my attention in the middle, and then I liked the end. Granted, it's not like the greatest twist ending ever, but as far as emotional gravity went, I really enjoyed the end of it.
I agree.
I mean, I somewhat agree to an extent, but also disagree. Yes, like it's almost like the framework is basically this character telling his family a story, so that means like a huge chunk of the body, if not the entirety of it, is him telling like the back research of how teleportation technology came to pass and what the experiments were on living conscious beings who were passed through it and what the effects were. It's just that it's like it takes like a roundabout road, and we've done a couple of Stephen King stories on MOTS here and there. So I probably, if we're gonna do scores soon, like I'm leaning towards a 2, just like in general, like overall, because it's bookended very nicely. Yes, and I think like you guys seem to think it's more of like, oh, what a twist! Like, and we discussed that like previously as well on another recent MOTS. Just that I didn't mind it. Like, I actually thought it was quite effective because I think Stephen King, of course, is known for like that's his style. That's sort of what his deal is. So I thought it was a bit more effective than maybe you guys did. I just thought like, yes, because of the nature of the framework, like it being a basically story within a story, and then you see the after effects of like the background information that is relayed throughout the body. It maybe could have been more concise, I guess is the best way I can say it. But otherwise, I thought it was pretty solid. I just don't think it deserves full 3 points. Is all.
I almost completely agree with you.
Do you think there was like a fault of structure, or
yeah, like kind of like maybe if you stretch it out like to a longer story, that would have been like unnecessary as well. But I think it's just that it's hard to put my finger on, Rich.
Yeah, I think some of the parts with Dr. Caroon I felt could have been like he could have cut down on some of that stuff,
exactly.
Like especially his whole trip to the veterinarian, and then back.
Like it was nice detail, and like it sort of like built up the tension, but also like I think it would have like not lost anything, or some of it was edited out, like just again like condensed a little bit more. But that's all.
That's just what I was going to say, Scott. I thought that those parts kind of built up tension, and I enjoyed those parts. What I'm going to give this a 2 for is I thought that the beginning of this story, the intro, was a little bit weak. It didn't grab me right away, and I'm going to give it a 2. But I thought that the middle and the end were good and like really got me into reading it. So I started reading this pretty late at night one night, and at the beginning I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And then like by the end of it, I was like, I don't know why I ever thought that I was not going to make it, because it just like snowballs into this story that's really pretty damn compelling, I thought.
I mean, I get you. All I'm saying is just overall, like, it's not it's not that I thought it was like, of course, bad or like weak by any means. I think I'm gonna take points like variously throughout away to make it equal to 2.
Fair enough.
So is that 2 for everyone?
Yeah.
I think it
2's
is.
all around. All right.
That means I'm up with.
I believe you're up with themes, my man. Yes.
Let's see. Themes. Don't withhold pertinent information when you're telling a story.
Try not to traumatize your family members.
Yeah.
Or give them enough information that they won't traumatize themselves.
I love the little line at the end when he's just like, "Oh, Ricky, the same Ricky who rode his slide board faster than all the other kids."
Yeah,
and he's like, thinks about it. He's like, in hindsight, I probably should have seen this coming.
Yeah, I think it's something like Ricky was a child unacquainted with the notion of fear
until now.
Yeah.
Perhaps I should have gone to sleep last and made sure that Ricky was
Yeah.
asleep.
Yeah, sure.
I hope that he wasn't the first one out. Because that was just...
It implies that he was in some sense. Like,
Oh, he
I
was
took it that way.
Mark, the main character.
Yeah.
No, that Ricky was.
Oh.
No. It said that Mark was the first one that he was like, I'll go under first to show you guys that it's
yeah.
okay.
Okay, you're right.
And then,
Regardless of that detail. True.
Yeah.
You're right
I'm
about
surprised they don't have, like... I guess after this, they probably introduced more...
that. Forceful means of ensuring it.
Ensuring that people took the...
I mean, the lawsuit is unimaginable.
Yeah, exactly.
Family.
Oh my god, he's walking away with millions.
well, who
Maybe.
knows? He's on
What if
some
they
other
signed a
planet. They're
waiver?
like,
Yeah.
we're not going to let this guy talk to anybody on Earth
But
again.
millions in Martian.
Yeah,
Which
Martian.
is, the exchange
signed
rate
a
is
waiver that
terrible.
was
Almost
like-
useless.
But I just want to. I think it's even deeper than that. It's a parable about parenting. With as much as you try to warn your children the dangers of the world,
And or protect them.
They're still gonna
They'll
go
find a
their
way
own
to
way.
fuck themselves over.
They're going to grow up faster than you expect.
Yeah.
I'll let you have that one. I will not say anything further.
Nailed it.
Damn, I don't even know it. Got nothing.
Anyway,
I mean,
either that or curiosity. Could be
I mean,
a
it's.
theme.
I think they're
Curiosity
sort
killed
of
the
tied
Ricky.
into that because children are naturally curious, and
Yeah.
of course, if you like rile them up with if not rile them up purposely, they want to know, they want their hunger, they're eager to explore more and know more, and
Like
you're
you kept saying, like
yeah.
Patricia keeps asking the right question,
Yeah.
which is why I'm going to ignore her.
Yeah, exactly.
And
He's trying
answer
to
all Ricky's
avoid the
questions.
horrifying truth,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, in some ironic sense, because of that, his kid is at least his son, not his daughter, is traumatized and horrified by the experience because he again was sort of daredeviling himself.
Children
I
are
think it's
also
both.
naturally psychotic.
Yeah, that's what I
and
said
that's,
earlier.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but for a science fiction about like teleportation, and they go into pretty in depth kind of. I'm going to put the emphasis on the fiction on this part,
Right.
Sure.
But I don't know how much there was thematically like pertinent for like advances in science. It seems
It's
more
kind
of
of skimmed over.
Yeah.
They did. So King did talk quite a bit about the oil,
I mean, there were
I don't know about
not
wars,
quite a
but
bit,
like
but there were details
like
about
oil
it, yes.
and like water and like the transfer of power from the oil we'll say the oil barons to the water
Sure.
barons.
The conglomerates.
Thank you.
Yes.
You made me forget one of the things that his hatred for OPEC. It was mind-boggling. I mean, this was written in the 80s, you know.
Yeah, 81, I believe, yeah.
But
Sure.
he's really anti-OPEC, which
He's not a
seems to
fan.
be- which strikes me as curious, but nonetheless. Like I feel like he's like I like Stephen King, but I feel like and I know he implements like current events into
Right.
his thing. But I don't know if he had anything interesting to say about OPEC aside from being like, look at these
these sons of
countries
bitches.
attempting to nationalize their
Sure.
natural resources.
It almost to me was the background detail. Like, yes, Spot was there. It wasn't like forcefully noticeable to me, but it was certainly contained therein. So I guess the question at hand is, how much weight do I think those themes like seem to carry here? I don't know. Like, originally I probably was going to lean towards giving this a 1, but now that you sort of like made me think about it more and we're talking it out, I'm not saying there's like an absence of themes or anything, but I think it's the commentary isn't as deep. It's more like an interesting like sort of Twilight Zone-y tale, and he even said it was published in Twilight Zone magazine, right? So like, it's not quite commenting upon, and if it is, like, it's not doing it all that in depth, even to the OPEC thing or the oil like conglomerates, as I said. So like, I might just give it a default 0. Not that I didn't like it. is that it wasn't maybe the point. It was sort of like, again, like a classic, like sort of quick flash of horror from King, which I think will speak out in style and so forth, that I think was effective. Just thematically, I'm not sure if it gets there for me.
I kind of agree with that. Like it was like a dash of like a nod to here. There's some oil stuff going on right now.
Yeah, it's sort of like the background framework of this, but it's not a.
He spent more time talking about the mob, using it for.
There was certainly a lot more of the theme,
which I thought was
the
pretty
themes
good too,
of this devoted to his family life, right?
Sure. Yes.
Which, while interesting, I don't think was all that deep, and I think that the themes were in service to the plot.
Yeah.
As far as this short story went, I don't think he was trying to like say anything necessarily.
No.
He just wanted to.
It's just a means to it.
Yeah, exactly. He just wanted to have a kind of he just wanted to talk to a couple of things that he could while he was developing his plot for this horror story. And not that that's a bad thing, and I don't think I enjoyed this story, but I don't know if I can give Themes a 1 for it.
Yeah, I'm with you, pretty much.
I'll say.
No.
Yeah, it's sort of like soft but default kind of 0, but
Yeah.
I think that's how we're coming down. So it seems.
I'm going to give it a 1
Yeah?
for the parenting aspect of it.
Okay.
I thought that was like even if it's a simple theme, I think that was enough, and I think that was, in a sense, if he was going for anything, that's what he was going for, and I think it got his message across. So I'm going to give it a very soft 1. But
I got you.
1 nonetheless.
All right.
That's fair.
Rich, what are you giving it?
I don't know if I can give that a 1. And I give it a
I could
0.
see it being 50-50, but I think I'm coming down.
Yeah, it was
to 0.
close. It's a close thing, but like I don't know if I can give it a 1
Yeah.
for that, but I can see how you would.
Sure.
Scott, you up next?
All right, so it's me with antagonists, which I sort of maybe all the credit that I may be taking away from themes, I've sort of somewhat like jaunt into antagonist, if you will, because it's sort of like experimental technology, like unknown things, and yes, it's more soft sci-fi, as you said, like more fictiony than science, but nevertheless, like people have thought about teleportation technology for a long time and writing about it, and exploring its various facets and implications. So in this one, I think it is like, it's almost like a commentary on consciousness, and that's something I really like. Whether consciousness is separate from your physical body, like, and in this one it implies that it is.
We should talk
Or at
about
least
these in themes
in some way.
That's actually a brilliant.
Kind of.
I might have to go back.
I mean, yes, that's contained therein. So that means the antagonist is like your own consciousness, perhaps, or the nature of.
Well, it goes to that one line where he said your consciousness could be your best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, but are you your body or are you your consciousness?
Well, that's
so
kind
you're
of the thing.
saying you're
I'm giving Thieves a 1.
All right.
I'm going back, changing my 0 to a 1.
All right. Well, I just convinced us all to do that myself as well. Mark me
Can I
down
do that too?
because of that.
That's actually
That was my
Scott with
how
the
did-
jaunting
yeah.
back to the past.
yeah.
How did we
retroactively.
miss
Jaunt to the
that?
future.
How do we miss that? That's my question.
Well, because I was
Because that wasn't his intent.
I was saving to bring up.
I don't know if it wasn't his
There.
intent, but it wasn't the obvious intent.
Right.
Right.
Sure. So we'll retcon that real quickly.
All right.
So given that, but it still ties in because like, if indeed we're to believe there's some kind of like sort of
That's a first.
pocket universe where like if you're teleported, like your consciousness is removed somehow from your physical the state of your body, but yet feels the press of time in some like super accelerated like an uncomfortable way, then yes, like the unknown factor I guess I would say perhaps the overarching antagonist within something like this in this story specifically. So now I may reverse and having give Deems a 1. I may say it's a 0 antagonist. It's hard to put my finger on because there's nothing, of course, antagonizing them per se, except for not like fear of the unknown experience.
The idea of, I guess, the other or the unknown,
Yes,
right?
that's
Like
what
I think that's
it's actually a very common theme in kind of horror science fiction.
probably the most common
like,
theme.
If you look at anything, whether you're dealing with robots or with anything, it's the idea
Martians
is
or
that
whatever. Yeah.
This is what bad things could happen from the progression of science.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an old tradition of it. I don't like that as an antagonist because it's to me a very cheap antagonist. It's
right because
what you mean.
because the positive sides of the progression of science are never shown, right?
I mean, yes, it is. I mean, especially in this story, it is, of course.
Is it?
Yes, because they can travel to and from Mars instantaneously.
Yeah,
But
except
it's
for also it can make you go fucking insane
As
and like
long-
lose all your
Yeah.
you just like
Okay.
have to live an eternity
Yeah, but,
in
like,
this fucking void.
As long as you're unconscious, and most people are ready for it. Like, okay, let me be unconscious. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean?
Except for that poor woman that was strapped down to him.
Yes, but she didn't choose that. It's like
they're gonna kill that poor
It's
woman.
not. They're gonna jaunt that poor woman, dude. But my point is, they did.
Well
jaunt that
played,
woman.
sir.
My point is that, like, even within the fiction of the story, in that case, it wasn't her choice. She was thrown into it.
Sure.
So
Literally.
So I guess actually that's a good point. The idea that science used correctly is
it's
a positive
perfectly fine.
thing.
Yes.
Science can be used incorrectly as a very horrible thing.
Think of it this way.
Actually, that's a very good point.
Think of it this way. It's like a roller coaster.
Great
Right?
theme.
If you don't obey the rules of being on a roller coaster, you're probably going to get hurt and die.
Yeah.
So if you don't obey the rules of jaunt, you're going to have to take some anesthesia to pass out as we jaunt you.
So
okay.
the sun is the antagonist here.
This
Well, 12-year-olds in general.
Curiosity then. Curiosity killed the Ricky. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, this is very sticky one to discuss.
It is.
Just in light of what we just said. So I think I might come down on a 1 because I think it's more effective now as we discuss it than whatever they're antagonized by. It's a impactful force,
I'm gonna agree with you.
whether tangible or intangible.
I really like the antagonist here. Like it's just this. There's no, and as you know, as we always talk about, like I like to have a tangible antagonist.
I understand.
But in this, but I will also admit when there's not one, and there's a good
Stand-in.
intangible
Yes.
antagonist.
Exactly.
And I think that in this story, there's a good intangible antagonist, and it's this idea of like the horrors of the eternity, or like and I know I'm kind of riffing off of what you said, Scott. I'm not saying exactly what you said, but like the horror of the abyss, right, is kind of the antagonist, and that has always scared the shit out of me.
Sure.
Yes.
And this story
it's not
brought
even
it
like-
full circle.
It's not even
pretty
a
well, I
separate
think.
abyss. It's like the abyss of yourself. Again, if you're lost in the depths of your own consciousness for what feels like an eternity, you'll probably go insane.
Ian, I feel like you're bursting at the seams right now. Please, please,
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
please tell us.
Like it's and I'm not taking anything away from Stephen King, but and I'm going to make this a precedent for myself. Like anytime we deal with this kind of thing, when they use like a foreign technology that you don't quite understand, so immediately you have to fear it because of everything that could go wrong with it. I always feel it's a very cheap.
It's kind of a cop-out thing, is what you're saying. It
No,
seems.
like it's a cheap narrative device for scaring people, because people will always be scared of what they don't understand because they're not willing to look farther into it.
Sure.
Like
I get you.
And I think that and I have to give it a 0 because it's like to me it's cheap, and I always.
But do you think
It technically wasn't new technology within the narrative of the story. It's been
New
around for...
technology to them. It's like it's
but
like
not to the main character?
me showing you how to use a computer, and you're afraid it's going to electrocute you, and then it does.
Well, I
But,
believe-
but he
like-
said it'd been around for like at least
300 years.
300 years,
Or
right?
something.
The whole problem, I think, was that Mark was too comfortable with it and
Yeah.
didn't actually adequately explain what could happen with it to his son.
So Mark's the antagonist.
Mark is the antagonist.
Bad parenting.
Mark fucked
if
shit
you want to
up.
put bad parenting as the antagonist,
Yeah.
then we'll give that a 1. But I mean, again, like
Mark's carelessness.
it's all somewhat nebulous. But I understand what you just said, like your point completely. Like I get that for sure, but it's sort of like a double-edged sword, because fear of the unknown, while exploited cheaply for a plot device, but that's a like ingrained human fear, like ingrained human instinct to fear the unknown. So I mean, yes, it's easy to exploit that, but because of the fact that it like is ingrained in all of us to some extent.
Right. I guess.
I don't
oldest
think you
of
contradicted me
antagonists.
at all.
I guess the question is: would you make wolves a bad antagonist for older stories? Like the fear of the unknown coming and getting you. This could be a much longer conversation, I'm sure.
In Dr. Zhivago,
Mm-hmm.
they have a very interesting.
Go on.
You brought this up
aspect
on
of it.
on MOTS before.
Yes, where it takes place in a semblance of like a modern day civilization, though it's like several decades prior or a century now prior. But he's talking about how he was reintroduced the concept of the wolves being an actual antagonist, and that was an interesting way of dealing with the fact of the reemergence of the unknown that we didn't know. So yeah, it can be used effectively. I'm saying this wasn't an effective use of it.
All right.
That's
fair enough.
I get you.
Fair enough.
Like I said, I see both ways, and now like we can have it sort of like wormed our way through this conversation. I'm going to give it a solid 1 at the end of the day.
I'm going to give it a soft
because of what I
one.
said.
I'm going to give it a soft one.
You can give it a 1.
All right.
Ian, you're up next with Protag.
Protag.
Perhaps not the worst parent in history.
Certainly not the best.
Mark
though.
Oates is the worst parent in this story.
I like that.
And I don't know. I just, it's weird. He's interesting enough, and I like the fact that we get his mental process over like, I'm not going to frighten my children, but I'm going to think this stuff in my head about what all the horrors of the Jaunt, but I'm not going to express it. I don't know. Like, he was okay. He was very mediocre. It could go 0. It could be a 1. Convince me.
I think that you get a strong sense of who Mark is in this story, and I think that that's the most important thing when I'm judging on a protagonist. It's not the only thing, but I think it's the most important thing is you get a strong sense of who that character is, and you don't have to like the protagonist, I don't think, to give it a 1. And certainly, it's not that I don't like this guy, it's that I don't give a shit about him, really.
Yeah.
But I think that you get a strong sense of who he is, and I think for that reason, I have to give him a 1. I was actually thinking about giving him a 0, but I convinced myself otherwise when thinking back about it. Like you get this idea of like him, his family life, how he's trying to protect his children, how he's trying to protect his wife to a certain extent. Like he's a character with dimensions. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that you don't really learn a lot about him, he's like through his storytelling, you get a lot of dimensions about like, and through his thought process that you see, you get a lot of dimensions about him. And I think in that sense, I have to more strongly go towards a positive score.
If I just make a quick point, I agree with you, and I think that Stephen King, again, I mentioned he's a talented writer. Under a lesser author,
he's okay, I guess.
It would. This character would have been very flat.
Yeah, but I completely agree.
But he does flesh out like just through little subtleties.
I completely agree. Like Stephen King does a good job with characterization always, and everything that I've read that he's written.
That's a fair point.
That's one of his strong points for sure.
So you guys may have just convinced me with that little conversation there, because I was almost like razor's edge 50-50 on this, because on the surface my initial reaction would say it's like he's a little flat.
Yeah.
But now that you mentioned, like, you're right, like there are moments where he's deciding like how much information to reveal about the background and history and like the dangers of jaunting.
Yeah,
I love the way that he wrote his thought process on that, because it kind of spills over into what he actually says.
Yeah, exactly.
Like his thoughts end directly before he opens his mouth to speak.
Exactly. And then like his daughter keeps saying, "What about the mice, Daddy?" And he's like,
and she had a good point, but I ignored it.
No, he's like, she's asking the right questions, her heart's in the right place, but he can't bring himself to tell her like the horrifying truth. But it's like, none of us have kids ourselves, but I can certainly see the situation where like you're trying to explain something more adult to a child, or like to an adolescent.
I think the way he should have went about this was to tell him exactly what happens and saying, but it's okay as long as you take your anesthetic dose and nothing will happen to you.
Yeah,
Ricky,
why don't you listen to me, Ricky? You stupid bastard.
But sure, like so.
Nurse, keep an eye on that one.
So like,
just inject the shit out of him. That's all you have to do.
Maybe it's like a solid, or at least a soft one, because I was like wavering on it. But you're right, Steve. Like your guys' point like stands. Like King does do a good job of, even if it's like not all that much information, you still get a sense of who this character is.
He's still Stephen King. He's always going to write that, and like he's always going to get that across. You can
see him struggling.
This bastard, this son of a bitch, not even like blessed with the ability to like make a good character.
Sure. So like you said, yes, you can see like his motivations, like of what information to reveal.
Sorry.
Apparently, you guys are degenerating into giggles. So
I got a little overzealous about how jealous I am.
I
of
will give you
Stephen King.
credit for convincing me to give it a solid to soft 1, but not a 0 on protagonist.
We going ones all around on that?
Yeah.
Ian?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
See if we're up with a sport.
Ooh, supporting Dr. Karoon.
I love how you went to him first.
Background character.
I liked him. I liked him better than the family, I guess.
You know what's crazy? Like all of his characterization came from like Mark's interpretation
Yeah.
of the information that he read.
What he has.
But
exactly.
Mark's interpretation is like exactly what you expect from like, oh, here's what I heard about this doctor, and here's what I'll extrapolate about his
first of all,
background.
Originally, I believe, if I had it in front of me, it was like 322 years ago that it was invented.
Yeah.
Yeah, 320. So that means Victor Karoon, like, what you know of him is reading about, like, a person in history books.
Of course.
300
And
years
like
removed.
it's the same way that we think about like Albert Einstein,
exactly.
basically. You know,
No,
like
it's even worse than that because it has to be like Thomas Jefferson would be a better example. Someone 300 years ago that we know
sure.
some about.
But the idea is like you get the highlights of what his personality was, and then
it was like
exactly
part like by the end he was like part Thomas Edison, part
yeah.
he's
Yeah.
like naming all these like
Yeah.
legendary figures.
Exactly.
including I think a couple people that don't exist. In
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, they're folk heroes.
Yeah.
right.
Sure.
But
So go
like,
on.
the idea is that it's like this character that Mark, whatever the hell her last name was, I don't remember. Oates didn't actually know anything about, but he extrapolated all these personality
Sure.
points out of his story, and like that's kind of what you do for like these scientists of lore, like Tesla, Einstein,
Ben Franklin.
even Edison, Ben Franklin,
Sure.
like that type of thing. And I think that this short story did a good job of hitting on the main points, then like kind of saying what Mark was thinking about the other, like about like what he could extrapolate on
They even got
and
to
things like that.
They even got to inject some tragedy into his character.
I
by
think
having the jaunt taken away from him.
And like knowing the points about his truck being out of gas and stuff like that, like gives you like so much more pathos for this character. I guess to use a Chris phrase.
it felt like someone. One of your friends watched a documentary on it,
right,
and then is explaining to you.
And he's like, "I'm
what's
gonna
going
say-"
So it's like
on.
drunk home history.
Exactly.
yeah, kind of.
Exactly.
That's really.
But he wasn't drunk.
Good way to put it. Sure, it's just like he
Maybe.
knows what he knows from what the history books tells us. And you're right, Steve. Like again, this was another one I was somewhat wavering on because I would say like originally I was going to make the argument that they're basically props. Like
Right.
second in
Oh,
command
his
is fall
family is
away.
definitely
His
props.
family are props.
Right. But,
I agree with that.
Dr. Kroon was actually the more I think about it, the more well drawn. Like he was a believable character, even though he's
He's not actually a
it's-
character.
yeah.
That's the best part about it.
You're right.
He's not actually a character. He's a character in a story.
But when his
the story,
when his parts are being
know?
told, like I could see he was a well realized character,
Yeah.
even if it was again secondhand or third hand even information from another character.
I love
So
it.
I think you convinced me on that one. Again, another one I was sort of like coin flipping, razor's edging.
I was definitely going to give it a 0 before this happened.
Yeah, like it's.
So-
I think it's really interesting. Like it's like somebody that knows a little bit about Einstein talking about the Manhattan Projects, and like
Sure.
oh, here's what happened in the Manhattan Projects, and here's why we have nuclear weapons, right? Like
Yeah, no, I get it. You're right.
And
it's a good analogy.
I kind of love that about the story.
I'll give you credit
Ian?
for swaying me. At
You
least.
look like you're deep in thought about this.
I am, and I think you convinced me. Although
yes.
I perhaps it's an argument more to Mark's character than it is to the Doctor's character.
Right.
Well, then if I'm right about that, then that's saying that none of the aspects of that character matter to.
But here's the thing:
It's to
the
Mark.
Doctor's character didn't actually exist in this story. The Doctor's character was not a character. He was a character in a story that was told in this
Sure.
story.
It's like the
Interesting. So I'm going to then give it a 0.
Give it a 0
It's a
if
Heart
you
of
want
Darkness
to.
kind
I'll
of
give it a
thing.
1 because I like that. That's
like
a,
Marlowe's
I
telling
like
me about
that's another
Kurtz. You know what I
another
mean?
step deeper
But that's
into it.
I think that's a more stylistic element,
Right.
and I might give it a 1
That's
for style
fair.
for doing
You
that.
could switch. You could
But
switch.
I'm going to
it.
give it a 0 for supporting.
For sure.
Okay.
That's fair.
I'm going to still give it a 1.
The final.
I'm still gonna
If it
one.
doesn't sway you, it's almost like Kurtz's character in Heart of Darkness. Kurt's not an actual character. You're being told the story of a person,
Mhm.
but he's so well drawn that I'm just saying.
We're not going to argue.
That's how
We're
I
not
took
going to
it.
argue Heart of
That's how I
Darkness
took what you
right
just
now.
said. And I like the way you put it, Stevo. So
Yeah.
for that very reason, I'm going to give secondary a 1 at the end of the day. That is all.
All right, so that's 3 1s and a 0.
I believe so.
Yes.
So I'm up with a dialogue.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Dialogue's pretty. It was serviceable.
Stephen King.
Yeah, it was
Dialogue.
Stephen King dialogue.
That's the only thing I can
Yeah.
say about it.
It's like it's good, and like some curses thrown in for like randomly.
Sure.
They kind of almost take me up, and then he pulls me back in.
Yeah, so this is back in 81, like his younger days, his more wild
Yeah.
and crazy days, I guess.
His
probably, like,
cocaine fueled
Yeah.
days.
It's like his
we'll say.
his like little kid schoolyard insults that he writes up, like turkey turds for brains.
Turkey turds for brains.
And I think that feeds into, perhaps again we're meta commentary, but if indeed Stephen King was in the midst of his like drug problems when writing the story, maybe that's why he was so vehemently against the OPEC thing. He's like threw it in there. He's like jacked up one night.
Let's just fucking talk
Anyway,
about
it's like-
this
he's
now.
probably just,
It's
like,
like David Bowie in the height of his.
He's caught along with his own thoughts for
drug
too
problem.
long, and then
exactly.
came up with the.
He's like, I'll just throw it into the story because fuck them anyways. But I get what you're saying. Like we've done the very same thing has come up when we've done other Stephen King stories where, yes, the dialogue is there, but it's in service to the rest, like the greater effect of the story at large. I would say. So and
it's like it has a weird effect on me. Like it's at times relatable, at times pulling me out,
Yeah.
and then immediately pulling me back in.
exactly, it has a similar effect on me. I agree. So the thing is, if you think about it, even like the story of Karun and everything we just said itself is dialogue. He's just telling you it.
Yeah,
But like it's phrased very well, for the most part.
it almost sounds like Mark Oates rehearsed this story before he had told his family.
Oh, I guarantee he did.
I bet you
And that's like I'm going back into Mark Oates' psyche right now.
that's implied, though.
I mean, he's been waiting for this to happen. He's been like just going through it in his
either
mind.
that or like all of his
Well,
other
we knew his
jaunts
family
was
was
just
gonna
like
do
him
it.
trying to calm down like somebody else that was next to him so that he could get it over quicker. It's just like, you want to hear the history of the jaunt?
Good.
So, as a wannabe linguist, I always have problems with these kind of stories, and especially with Stephen King writing these stories because of the peculiarities to his dialogue.
Mm.
He uses a lot of dialogue that's dated by the time I read it in this day,
Sure.
and would certainly be completely dated 300 years from now.
Mm.
And
well, that's every story. Like
it
that
is
does
every
that.
story. Well, I mean, there's
Hold
a
on,
few
hold on,
stories
hold
in
on. You finish, and then I want to ask you a question about that.
there. All right.
Go on.
It's just that you said some stuff pulled you out. Like occasionally he used slang or something that is immediately contemporary to when he's writing it. That would not fit in.
It's jarring. you're saying.
And that
Yeah,
nowadays. So anyway, he should have known better.
I would agree that Stephen King does that. I'm not sure that I would agree that it bothers me ever, and it's really weird because it should. When anybody else does that,
Yes, it should.
bothers me. But hear me out. Hear me out. Listen to my words.
Go on.
When Stephen King does it, I immediately get past it and then get into the rest of what he's saying. And it happens every time I read something by Stephen King. It doesn't bother me like it should. Like I see it and I'm like, oh, that's something that should fucking be annoying. And then I immediately go past it. And then I'm like, oh, I don't care anymore. And like I feel like that's a mark of really good dialogue. Like it's the ability to put something in that is like, I feel like it's him like patting himself on the back, like, oh, I got this fucking reference to the 1980s in here, which I should never do. But at the same time, this dialogue is good. It's just solid. It feels like down home dialogue. Like I feel like that's what Stephen King kind of does. And he makes you feel like you are in this conversation, or that you're watching this conversation.
Sort of saying about that familiarity that I always
Right?
when I read his words.
He makes you feel like you're watching this conversation from like where I'm sitting to you, Ian.
Mhm.
You know, like that's what Stephen King does, and he always does it, and pisses me off every time because I can't do that.
But I see what you're saying.
But like, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's this idea that the dialogue rises above, kind of these
you're running the mill stuff.
These momentary like phrases that are stuck in the 80s or the 90s or whatever whenever he's writing it, and he kind of just has a way to make you feel like you are that you know what's happening and that you know what this dialogue is and you feel very familiar with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not the response I was hoping for.
The thing is this, like, I'm largely on Ian's side in this one respect, and specifically to Stephen King, because, again, we've done a number of his stories at this point. It's, yes, I see what you're saying, Stevo, but even in light of all of that, and it's funny that you mentioned, like, in any other story, if it wasn't King specifically, you'd be like, fuck you, like, it's out of place, it doesn't make any sense, it's like, lower, it's, like, somehow, like, you know, downgraded.
Yeah.
In some way. But I think I'm on Ian's side because anything, the fact that he achieves with that, and you mentioned it too, Rich, I think is more like, it's odd to say this, but more towards his style than the dialogue itself. Even though it makes it feel as if the dialogue is natural, the way he writes it is somehow beyond what's actually being said. If that makes any sense at all. That's the best way I can describe it.
I'm reading this. I'm in the midst of reading the stand right now, and all of the dialogue is atrociously unnatural. Mm-hmm. But
somehow
for some reason I love it.
I understand.
For some reason I love the dialogue in that book.
You're right. It's a weird roadblock,
and it's so weird.
It's a weird roadblock. It's with him specifically.
I think he signed a pact with the devil.
Right, probably,
maybe. But
I'm gonna give it a 1 just because I can't hate his dialogue.
I'm going to give it a soft 0 and give more credit. Like, anything I'm taking away, I'm going to put back into style, which I think is up to me soon.
I think I might do the same as Scott.
Yeah.
I'll give it a 1.
Yes!
All right.
Yes.
I had that one peculiarity that I dislike about most science fiction in general.
That's fair.
Aside from, like, Battlestar Galactica with Frack and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But generally, I think I agree mostly with Steve-O that he does have
his impassioned speech worked.
His okay was it was a passionate okay.
It was a confirming. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Correct.
Fair enough. All righty.
All right.
Sky up next with style.
After all that, and speaking of style, this is where I'm going to give it probably the strongest, if not an equally strong one to everything else we said that I gave 1s to. Because, yes, of course, King is so well renowned, so known, and his style is like even I didn't know it's a Stephen King story. If you like blanked out the author, I probably could be like, this reads like a King story to me.
This feels like a Stephen King story.
So I can place it in that sense, and he always has a distinctive, style, if you will, for lack of a better term. And like you said, Steve-O, as we just discussed, the dialogue thing sort of flows into his style.
Yeah,
and I have to I'll give him all the credit in the world on that. So whatever I took away from dialogue just now, I'll put into style. It's so fucking solid, and somehow it's like hypnotically above that, I guess, is what you're sort of saying. So
I want to bring up Heart of Darkness again.
Okay.
I knew it was going to happen.
So you have the framework bookend in both of these stories.
Yep.
Except in Heart of Darkness, you have a character telling a story about himself in Marlowe in the Congo.
In different
with Kurtz involved. This one's like if Marlowe's telling a story about someone else, and then Kurtz appears at the end of the thing coming out of the Thames and like slicing the throat of the person
I don't know
he's talking to.
Like, that's a really funny. That's a hilarious goddamn analogy. That's one of the highest literary brow jokes I've ever heard in my life. But I love it.
That's
I think I don't think it's a 1-to-1 comparison because of the fact that you're following. But so this one has a weird break in it. A character. You have a plot. The bookends are actually where the main plot takes place, and then he dives into a secondary story. But I was initially going to give this a 0 because it actually irks me quite a bit, like the way the structure of the story. However, there are elements of it that we brought up earlier that I think Stephen King. If this wasn't Stephen King, this would be getting a much lower score than I'm going to give it. So I'm going to give it default 1.
Yeah.
Stephen King does. He brings his own style, right? And like he elevates it somehow, however he does it.
Yeah.
Whether it's through a deal with the devil or you know, it's through.
It's almost like he's reading my mind. Like when he feels that I'm getting brought out of the taken out of the story, he's just like, hey.
come on back in here,
Sure,
Rich.
I get that. You're right. It just sort of like, again, hypnotically feel like the sensation is like that reading a lot of his stuff.
He really elevates this story with his style. This is a story that could be boring as shit, and in fact, as I was saying
by all
earlier,
rights, kind of should be.
As I was saying earlier, started out very boring to me. Like and I think that was on purpose. He kind of wrote it that way in the beginning to not immediately draw you in. I don't know, maybe as a dare to himself, or perhaps,
you know what?
Or perhaps more likely as like, you know, he wanted to start off slow and then kind of raise the
trap you
throughout.
I think where you started getting pulled in, he sets a benchmark within the story, and then like has Mark notice that both of his kids and even his wife are starting to get interested.
Yeah, exactly.
In what he's talking about.
He talks about how interested I am in this story throughout the story. It's fucking insane. Like he just has. I feel like Stephen King has this like kind of, I don't know, sixth sense.
Sure.
I feel like a jackass for saying it like that, but like the sixth sense for like
he has a keen readily sense
for how
to do that. Yeah.
For how
Agreed.
people are following a story and like exactly when to ratchet up tension, exactly when to like, you know, fall off a bit and like bring it back up and like I don't know, I can't take any Stephen King story that I've ever read, I can't take any points off of it for style because he knows. If there's nothing else that this guy knows, it's how to write a story.
Steve, I think we can cut this episode up and send a love letter to Stephen King.
Yeah, well, we'll talk to Chris later. We'll see if we can.
He'll be on the horn very shortly after this episode.
We'll see if we can get Stephen King on the horn, and we'll.
But regardless,
who knows? He's probably writing about this right now.
He will be soon. But regardless,
so creepy.
Are we giving it all a 1 to style?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
True. All right.
So leads us to
the final countdown, the final jaunt.
recommendation, right?
Yep.
And I do not recommend this. I think there's better Stephen King works. I think there's better science fiction works. I mean, it's okay. It's readable. And there's nothing I particularly hate about this. But, again, 0.
Here's the thing. I also agree. It's again, a double-edged sword. If someone says, hey, for some bizarre reason, I've never read any Stephen King, I wouldn't put this anywhere near like
Please
the top
don't.
20 even. But I enjoyed reading it, but because there's so much like other stuff that's, if not more famous, just more, even not more accessible, better done. Even though I enjoyed the story, it was a good pick. But again, sort of like asterisk, like the steroids era of baseball, steroids Stephen King, like so much other stuff.
Cocaine Stephen King.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Exactly. So it's not a mark against it. It's just that I wouldn't recommend it versus a lot of his other stuff, and maybe to other stuff like this in general, even though I did enjoy reading this story, because this is one I have not gotten to before.
Yeah. But it was like, I actually had this recommended to me through TV Tropes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was
Fair enough.
reading through the subtrope, and I Must Scream.
Yeah.
And like looking for other
things that
stories that incorporate something like that. And that's always
which we also did.
Yeah.
Check that episode out.
Nice. But it's like, it fascinates me, like the fate of Ricky is like what fascinates me in like science fiction and fantasy stories and what have you. And that's why I brought it up in a couple conversations, and then when I had the chance to, once I found out that you guys had never read it, had a chance to throw it out there.
And like it's a perfect Twilight Zone kind of story, which I always love. It's just that within this relative to how we're measuring it here, I'm going to give it a default 0. But it's a good story.
Were you giving it a 0?
You're going to give it a 1? I assumed from that.
Yeah.
All right. Here's what I'll say. Being last to go. This story was an enjoyable story.
I agree.
I would recommend reading it, but it was a little long as far as short stories go. And And I think that if you're going to read Stephen King short stories, they're all about this length, probably,
roughly
or
within
longer.
the same range, sure.
There are better Stephen King short stories to read.
That's what I'm saying.
What I would normally say is, like, if you got a half an hour to kill, read this story, but it'll probably take you longer than a half an hour. So I don't know. I don't know if I want to give it a 1 or a 0 because, like, I think that it's an enjoyable story to read. If you have an hour to kill, for sure read this story. If you have a half an hour to
If you're stuck in a
kill,
waiting room,
if you have
or
a
the
half an hour to
DMV.
kill,
if you're at the DMV,
you're not gonna be able to finish the story.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting, and then you'll have to finish it later. I'm not against. I'm not saying I don't recommend this, but I wouldn't. This wouldn't be the first Stephen King short story to recommend.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at. That's what I was trying to say.
But, however, it might be the first sci-fi Stephen King story that I recommended.
All right. I mean, I get you, but
You know what? I'm going to give it a 1, just for that fact.
All
I don't
right.
think Stephen King has written very many sci-fi short stories.
sure.
And in terms of that, I think it's a good sci-fi horror, and you don't get that much of that from him. So I'm going to give it a 1 for recommendation.
All right. I get you, but what I said stands, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, and I'm going to give the scores then.
yeah.
I think that's it. Yep. Good.
So, Mr. Hermosi over yonder with his infatuation, creepy infatuation. I would say.
Stephen King, write
Stephen
me.
King gave it
Write a letter to me.
A 9.
Yes.
Mhm.
Rich gave it an 8. Scott, you gave it a 7, and I gave it a 6. Giving it an overall score for a 7.5.
I think it's appropriate.
actually,
yeah.
I think that's a pretty good
spot
score.
on, yeah.
I'm glad that I gave it a recommendation. Otherwise, it might have been too low.
No, 7.5. I think it's pretty. Again, it's a solid story given of the author and what we said about it. It stands. So I think we did a good job scoring it as such.
For sure.
Yeah.
I score a review a 10.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. I always score all reviews 10s. Anyway.
Antagonist especially was great.
Uh-huh.
Yes. All right. So I've been Rich Perry, joined by Stephen Hermosi,
Have a good night.
Ian Manzer,
Night.
Scott Thurlow.
And our podcasts are always longer than you think. See you next time.
See you next time.
Lots Ado About Nothing. Lots Ado About Nothing. Music by Chris Morgan.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Lots to do about nothing.
This has been a Los Alamos production. All rights reserved.